Candles once cost more than a day's wage, true symbols of wealth and power. From churches burning thousands to peasants stuck with smoky tallow, light itself was luxury. Let's dive right in.
Modern lighting is quite convenient. It's so cheap and plentiful that it's very easy to take it for granted. But for the vast majority of history, lighting was a much more complex affair, and in fact, a very expensive one. You see, prior to electricity, light sources were much fewer in number and availability. You had the sun, which was free for everyone, mostly, and then you had your trusty hearth at home, which would be kept at least partially lit at all times. Neither of these light sources was particularly useful for reading at night, however, assuming you could read in the first place. But let's say you could, which would make you either a noble or a clergyman. In that case, you'd be getting most of your artificial light from candles.
That's just crazy. Imagine flexing in the Middle Ages, not with a Rolex, but with a stack of beeswax candles. Seriously, candles were so pricey, they were basically the crypto of 1300. Literacy itself was the OG luxury item. If you were reading at night, you weren't just educated, you were loaded.
These candles would be made of wax, beeswax to be precise, which obviously came from bees. Interestingly enough, beekeeping wasn't really a thing in early medieval Europe, at least not in the sense we understand it today. Most people didn't keep bees at home, but rather hunted for wild bee nests in nearby forests. Aspiring bee masters would try to domesticate these wild bees by carving suitable trees into perfect nesting places and tending to the colony if it decided to move in.
I would like a jacuzzi over there, and a helipad over there, and an espresso thing over there.
Now, this practice wasn't particularly efficient, but it didn't need to be, because initially, demand for beeswax wasn't all that high. But then, Christianity came along and created a ton of new demand. The vast sanctuaries of churches and cathedrals required an unprecedented amount of candles to be properly lit. Bees were the perfect solution to this Christian problem. So, European beekeeping traditions really kicked off with the church and its monasteries.
The irony is wild. Christianity basically turned bees into unpaid interns for the church. Suddenly, forests full of hives weren't just nature, they were Costco candle aisles for cathedrals. And carving trees into perfect nesting places, that's medieval Airbnb. Okay, sorry I stopped with those jokes. The real kicker, monks became the OG influencers of apiculture, scaling candle production like it was a holy startup. Forget Silicon Valley, the original tech boom was literally buzzing in monastery backyards.
The clergy took special care of the bees in its domain and created dedicated bee forests whose sole purpose was to nurture new colonies. Christianity even enshrined the status of bees in its doctrines, with numerous saints and popes exalting their chastity and diligence. That takes the sting out of things. Arguably, the spread of Christianity was the best thing to ever happen to bees, at least population-wise. However, as Europe's own population grew, the ever-increasing demand for food resulted in forests being cleared away to make room for farmland. In fact, the Middle Ages saw one of the greatest waves of deforestation in history. So while the church did an excellent job of supporting the bees on its own territory, secular deforestation destroyed bee populations pretty much everywhere else. Ironically, the areas with the highest demand for beeswax became those least capable of producing it. In medieval England, for example, beeswax became 8 times more expensive than honey, and a single wax candle could cost more than a day's wage.
So bees went from being holy mascots to economic victims of humanity's endless more farmland and now DLC. Monks writing about bee chastity is peak medieval fanfiction, but the real drama was forests disappearing faster than your laptop battery at 2%. And get this, one candle costing more than a day's wage? That's like paying rent just to vibe with mood lighting. No wonder peasants stuck to smoky tallow. Luxury illumination was literally out of reach unless you were divine or filthy rich.
So, from where did Europe get its beeswax? Well, from the few places with any remaining forests: Scandinavia and Russia. Indeed, beeswax became one of the most valuable goods in the Baltic Sea trade. The famous Hanseatic League, a confederation of German merchants and guilds, monopolized this trade route and earned great profits in the process. Of course, these profits came at the expense of consumers. Well, we certainly don't hear of that happening anymore. So, by the 12th century, pretty much only the nobility and the clergy could afford wax candles. The fact that they used copious amounts of them didn't help. St. Peter's Basilica in Rome had 1,300 candles burning at all times in the shape of a cross, while the funeral of Edward I saw a total of 850 pounds of wax being burnt. The situation in England, specifically, got even worse when Henry VIII decided to cut ties with the Pope. In addition to getting as many divorces as he wanted, he also closed all the monasteries, destroying a large chunk of England's beeswax production. Now, the European commoner did have one alternative. Rather than making candles out of beeswax, he could use tallow.
The Hanseatic League pulling a beeswax monopoly is such classic medieval capitalism. Oh, you want light? That'll cost your dignity and a kidney. 1,300 candles blazing in St. Peter's, that's less holy glow and more fire hazard chic. And Henry VIII, man, wasn't just wrecking marriages, he wrecked England's candle supply chain. Meanwhile, peasants got stuck with tallow candles, cheap, smoky, and smelling like a medieval BBQ pit. Basically, lighting was a class system in wax form.
Instead, tallow is made of animal fat, and while its candles are dimmer, smokier, and generally quite smelly, they're still better than nothing. Candles remained an expensive commodity well into the 19th century, when German chemists discovered how to turn petroleum into paraffin wax, which is what we use in our candles to this day. So, there you have it. The humble candle was quite the luxury not too long ago. Anyway, my friends, I hope you enjoyed our brief dive into the heart of medieval beeswax economics. I'm sure this story will make for interesting dinner table conversations, so do let me know if you managed to impress someone with your esoteric knowledge and perhaps even consider supporting me on Patreon. That would be greatly appreciated. In any case, you shall hear from me again in 2 weeks for another bright, scented, and smokeless episode of SideQuest.
Crazy to think what used to be a luxury flex for nobles is now the $1 scented candle aisle at IKEA. From bee forests blessed by monks to chemists cooking up paraffin in the 19th century, the candle's history is basically one long TED Talk on how humans will always find a way to burn stuff. And honestly, it says a lot about us that we went from worshiping candles as holy symbols to using them mainly for bath time vibes and pumpkin spice season. SideQuest did an amazing job with this video. Link is in the description. The next one, let's just say, it might illuminate something you didn't expect. Stay nerdy.